Hello, friends. There's a provision inside Social Security law that is hitting a specific group of retirees with a reduction they never saw coming. Not a small adjustment, not a rounding difference that barely registers in the monthly deposit, a reduction significant enough to change how a household budget works, landing without warning, without a clear explanation in plain English, and in many cases, without the retiree having any idea that the foreign pension they worked decades to earn was going to interact with their American Social Security benefit in a way that would permanently shrink what they receive every month. The provision is called the Windfall Elimination Provision, and while it has existed in the law for decades, the number of retirees encountering it for the first time right now is growing because the population of Americans who worked part of their career abroad, contributed to a foreign pension system, and then returned to the United States to build Social Security earnings is larger than it has ever been. Today I am going to explain it completely. What it is, how it calculates the reduction, which foreign pension situations trigger it and which do not, what the real dollar impact looks like, and what options exist for retirees who are either approaching this situation and have time to plan, or who are already inside it and want to know if anything can be done. Stay until the very end. The last thing I cover is the interaction between this provision and survivor benefits, and for the families it applies to, the shock does not just land on the retiree, it follows them into death and reduces what their surviving spouse receives for the rest of their life. And if SSA Now is the channel that explains the rules nobody told you about before they determined what you receive, subscribe right now and turn on the bell. Let me start with why the windfall elimination provision exists. Social Security's benefit formula is deliberately progressive. It
replaces a higher percentage of income for lower earners than for higher earners, providing more proportional support to people who earned less over their careers. The problem this provision was designed to address is what happens when a worker has a relatively short Social Security earnings history alongside a pension from work that was not covered by Social Security. When SSA sees a modest amount of covered earnings, it applies the higher replacement rate, treating the worker as a lower earner. But that higher rate was designed for workers whose entire career was modest, not for workers who also have a separate pension representing decades of additional income. The windfall elimination provision modifies the formula for this group, reducing the replacement rate to prevent over-replacement of income for someone who is also receiving a separate pension. That is the policy rationale. The lived experience for retirees who encounter it is significantly less comfortable. Here is how the reduction actually works. Social Security's benefit formula applies different replacement rates to different portions of your average indexed monthly earnings. In 2026, the formula replaces 90% of the first $1,174 of your average indexed monthly earnings, 32% of earnings between $1,174 and $7,078, and 15% of earnings above $7,078. Under the windfall elimination provision, that 90% rate on the first portion is reduced. The reduction depends on how many years of substantial earnings you have in Social Security covered employment. With 20 or fewer years of substantial covered earnings, the 90% rate drops to 40%, the maximum reduction. With each additional year between 21 and 30 years, the percentage increases by 5 points per year until the provision phases out entirely at 30 or more years of substantial covered earnings. In 2026, the maximum monthly reduction is $587. For a retiree whose Social Security benefit before the WEP reduction was
$1,200 per month, a $587 reduction leaves them with $613. The shock is real, and it is permanent. Now, which foreign pension situations actually trigger this provision? The windfall elimination provision applies when a retiree receives a pension from employment that was not covered by Social Security and not subject to FICA payroll taxes. For foreign pensions, this depends significantly on whether the country where you worked has a totalization agreement with the United States. The United States has totalization agreements with more than 30 countries, including the United Kingdom, Germany, Canada, Japan, South Korea, Italy, France, and Australia. These agreements are designed to prevent double Social Security taxation and allow workers who split careers between two countries to combine credits for eligibility. Under most totalization agreements, work performed in the foreign country and credited under the foreign system is not treated as non-covered work for WEP purposes, meaning the pension from that work generally does not trigger the provision. However, the specific terms of each agreement, how long you worked in the foreign country, whether you were temporarily transferred versus permanently employed, and whether you were also paying into the U.S. system simultaneously, all affect the WEP analysis for your specific situation. The totalization agreement framework is not a blanket exemption. It requires individual evaluation. For workers who spent years employed in countries without a totalization agreement and who contributed to that country's national pension system, the foreign pension is treated as a non-covered pension for WEP purposes. The provision applies, the reduction is calculated, and most of these retirees find out at exactly the wrong moment. Drop a comment right now and tell me, did you work outside the United States at any point in your career and contribute to a foreign pension system? Because I want to understand how many people watching
this are potentially inside this provision without knowing it. Here is how the shock typically plays out. A retiree spent part of their career working internationally, perhaps 10 years in a country without a comprehensive totalization agreement, contributing to that country's national pension system. They returned to the United States, continued working, built Social Security credits over 15 to 20 more years, reached retirement age, and filed for Social Security with an estimate in mind from their My Social Security account. What they did not realize is that the My Social Security benefit estimate does not automatically account for the windfall elimination provision. The estimate is calculated from their earnings record alone, without reference to the foreign pension SSA does not yet know about. The actual benefit after SSA processes the application and applies the WEP reduction is significantly lower than the estimate that guided their planning. A retiree planning around a $1,500 monthly Social Security benefit who receives $950 after the WEP reduction has a retirement income picture that looks fundamentally different from what they anticipated, and the reduction is permanent. For retirees approaching their claiming decision who know they will be subject to WEP, the most important immediate action is calculating the actual WEP-adjusted benefit before making any claiming timeline decisions. SSA has a WEP calculator available at SSA.gov that allows you to input your non-covered pension amount and your years of substantial Social Security earnings to produce an estimated WEP-adjusted benefit. Use this calculator, not the general benefit estimate from My Social Security, as the basis for your retirement income planning. The years of substantial covered earnings threshold also creates an actionable planning window. Substantial earnings for WEP purposes in 2026 means earning at least $31,275 in Social Security covered employment in a given year. A year with
less than this amount does not count as a year of substantial covered earnings, even though the earnings are still recorded in your record. If you currently have 25 years of substantial Social Security earnings and several more working years remaining, those additional years reduce the WEP impact by 5 percentage points per year until the provision phases out entirely at 30 years. The decision about how long to continue working in covered employment is not just a retirement timing decision for someone in this situation. It is a WEP reduction strategy with real dollar consequences. Now, the survivor benefit interaction I told you to stay for. When a retiree subject to WEP passes away, their surviving spouse's survivor benefit is calculated based on what the retiree was actually receiving, including the WEP reduction, or on what the retiree would have received without the reduction, whichever is higher. This is a specific survivor benefit protection written into the law. The WEP reduction that applied to the retiree's own benefit does not automatically carry through at full force to the survivor benefit. However, the government pension offset is a separate provision that can affect the surviving spouse directly if the surviving spouse themselves received a pension from non-covered employment. The government pension offset reduces the survivor benefit a surviving spouse can receive from Social Security by 2/3 of their own non-covered pension amount. If the surviving spouse also worked abroad and receives a foreign pension, the GPO calculation applies to their survivor benefit independently. For couples where both partners have foreign pension exposure, the interaction between WEP on the retiree's benefit and GPO on the surviving spouse's survivor benefit can produce a combined reduction that leaves the surviving spouse in a significantly more difficult financial position than either provision alone would suggest. This is the planning conversation that most
couples with international work history never have because it requires understanding two different provisions, how they interact, and how each person's specific foreign pension determines the magnitude of each reduction. Having this conversation before one spouse files, while both are healthy, while income projections can be adjusted, is significantly better than having it after the WEP reduction appears in the first deposit. Call SSA at 1-800-772-1213 and ask specifically about the windfall elimination provision and government pension offset as they apply to your household situation. Ask SSA to walk through the WEP calculation for your specific years of substantial covered earnings. Ask about the GPO calculation for your spouse if they also receive a non-covered pension. And use the WEP and GPO calculators at SSA.gov to independently verify the estimates SSA provides. Here is the bottom line. The windfall elimination provision is not a new rule. It has been in the law since 1983. What is new is the growing number of retirees encountering it for the first time, because the generation of Americans who built international careers is now reaching retirement age in significant numbers and walking into a provision that reduces their Social Security benefit in ways they were never warned about. The shock is real, the reduction is permanent, and the window to plan around it is the window before the claiming decision is made, not after. So here is what to do today. Go to SSA.gov and use the WEP calculator to estimate how your specific situation affects your benefit. Identify whether a totalization agreement between your foreign work country and the United States applies to your specific employment circumstances. Count your years of substantial Social Security covered earnings against the $31,275 threshold and assess whether additional working years would reduce your WEP impact meaningfully. And use the WEP adjusted estimate as the basis for your retirement.
Income planning, not the unadjusted My Social Security projection. The foreign pension offset shock does not have to be a shock if someone explains it before it arrives. Consider this your explanation. If SSA now gave you information today that SSA itself never provided, subscribe to this channel and turn on the bell. Every provision inside Social Security that reduces what retirees receive without announcing itself. Every interaction between pension systems that produces unexpected results at the worst possible moment. I bring it here before the shock lands. And share this video with anyone you know who worked internationally at any point in their career. The windfall elimination provision may be sitting directly in their retirement timeline right now. I will see